Hello and welcome to Life Matters. This is an actuality series where we discuss various topics with experts. Life as we knew it has changed dramatically in the past few years. With COVID, many of us have lost loved ones, families have lost the income that they had, and they've had to move to smaller homes. Many children had to change schools, and the list just goes on and on. Loss and ultimately grief in general has become a part of our daily lives now. As adults, we've developed ways to cope with it, but what about our children? How are they coping? As Christians, we have our faith and we trust in God to help and guide us through these times. But that doesn't mean we don't have questions, and many of us are searching for answers. To help us understand some of our questions, we've invited Heinrich Benjamin. He's a psychologist at the Department of Correctional Services to just help us look at these issues. Heinrich, thank you very much for joining us. In our first episode, we spoke about grief in adults, and today we're going to continue that discussion, and we're going to talk about grief in children and what they actually are going through. Heinrich, how do children understand death?
I think before we get to understanding how children, what their conceptualization of death is, maybe it's useful for us just to go back to the definition of grief so that we all have the same point of reference. So when we talk about grief, we are talking about the emotional pain we experience following loss. Typically, we talk about loss in the context of losing a loved one. But when it comes to children, we know that a loss of a friend. My parents have gone through a divorce, so there's that loss of a family, a nuclear family that's happening. I've got 2 homes now. Maybe there are step-brothers and step-sisters involved, and now the worry is, do I still have a brother and sister? So in that context, grief does not only mean or it's not only activated when we lose a loved one, but it also involves things like losing a job that you mentioned earlier on, a loss of a career, a loss of health. Now, coming back to your question about how children understand death, it's quite an interesting question because sometimes we think that children don't have any feelings or thoughts about it. In fact, they do. So the research is quite clear. The way children understand death largely is dependent on their age and their developmental level. So if we look at young children in particular, you'll find that their concept or their understanding of the concept of death, they don't understand that death is something that's permanent and irreversible. To them, death is something that's temporary. And we see that even when they watch cartoons, maybe a cartoon character passes away or dies in the episode and now they come back to life again. Or the video game that we play, they can just press the reset button and they can start again. So you'll find that even when going through the grieving process for children, you'll find 1 minute they're okay, they're playing, and then the next minute they're not okay, and they're in and out of that process. So we find that that is what impacts them, their understanding of death, and because of their lack of understanding, you'll actually see that they don't fully realize or grasp what the loss means for their life.
So as you've said now, it depends on their age and their experiences. But do you see a definite difference between the way they grieve and the way adults grieve?
In short, yes, there is a difference between the way adults and children grieve. But I also want to mention that grief is a very individualized process. So the way one child grieves may not be necessarily the same as another. And so sometimes parents find that very difficult to understand, but my child isn't crying, my child isn't this. 1 minute they're okay, 1 minute they're not okay, and it brings up some anxiety. It's perfectly normal in relation to the loss. So if I could make an analogy, if when I think of kids, I always think of a puddle of water or a muddy puddle. Peppa Pig has that. My kids often watch that. So you find that, children jump in and out of that muddy puddle and they enjoy that. And that's how grief for a child is. They literally jump into it and get out of it again. It's something that's automatic for the child. It's not something that they control. We got to remember, because of their limited understanding of death and its permanence, It's too much for the psyche, for the brain of the child to manage. So what the brain automatically does is it moves in and out. It's a defense for the child. And when we compare that to adults is constantly aware. They stuck in this grief. It's nearly like they're stuck in this wave. And they may have moments of being okay, but they kind of revert back to that. So a child can move in and out of grief. So when you see your child doing that, parents shouldn't be concerned. It's quite normal in relation to the loss.
A lot of the time, I think what people struggle with is how much do you tell the child? How much information do you give them? How do you help them through that process with the amount of information you give them?
Yeah, it's a very common question. We find that often when we deal with families and there's a loss, do we tell our child? The answer is yes. You got to be honest with your child, but also as a parent, you know your child's understanding and developmental level. So sometimes parents use these analogies or euphemisms like, we've lost him and or for an example, he's no longer with us. He's in an aeroplane. In my case, when my father passed away, there was an example made of Pa Jerry got into an aeroplane and he flew all the way to Jesus. And the next time I had to take a flight, my kids were a bit afraid that I wouldn't come back. And I think when we make these analogies or euphemisms, we actually confuse the child. We got to be very clear and direct. So an example of that could be, we could say to our child that this person is dead, their bodies don't work anymore, they can't breathe, they can't kick, they can't run, and they will not be coming back to us. I know that parents often feel, because we are church, and we want to also make them aware of the hope one day that we will see them again. That's okay, but you got to also be mindful of the kind of questions that you will get. I make a simple example. I spoke to my children one day about God and how big He is and how strong He is. And then my children wanted to know if God is bigger than the earth, bigger than the universe, and how big is His toilet. So you got to be prepared for funny questions like that. And the key thing is, when you don't know the answer, say that. Mommy, daddy, auntie, uncle, we're not sure of the answer. We're going to find out, and it's important that they come back. I think the biggest thing that we want to create for our children, in addition to being honest with them, it's an environment where they can ask questions. And it's okay. Sometimes parents feel like we have to give an answer. We got to know what to say to the child. Sometimes it's okay to say, Mommy's not sure, and I will find out. And that's okay, as long as the child knows that Mommy will come back.
And what I also find is that people, they think that the children are unaware, but children pick up that people are sad. And sometimes that is the question, why is Mommy sad? And that is a good way also, I think, to lead into telling the story of what the problem is.
100% agree. You often get people who have this idea that they must be strong for their children. Sometimes it's good to also show your vulnerability, to model for your children. It's okay to cry, it's okay to be sad, and there are people around us that care for us and love us, and it's okay. It helps the child move through the grieving process, because often we get stuck there. I feel like I have to be strong, and then months, years later, we find ourselves still trying to, get out, become unstuck. So it's okay to be vulnerable with your child. It's not like you're going to burden the child. You're letting the child know, Mommy is not feeling okay. Mommy is missing Pa, or Ma ever's passed away. And sometimes Mommy feels a bit sad. And it's okay then. If you're feeling sad, you can tell Mommy about it. That's okay to have that open discussion with your child.
And obviously, keeping that discussion open, and also just keeping an eye on your child to see how they genuinely are doing with what's happening.
Very important. I think you are touching here on some of the signs and symptoms following loss, some of the things that parents should become more aware of. And if I could quickly just touch on a few. I remember, because grief is very individualized, it's different, I'm going to more speak on some of the common things that we see. and I'm going to try and cover the entire sort of developmental span of a young child. So often we find very young children, even infants, just babies born the other day. You mentioned it early on. Children sense when something is not okay, and they get that sense from their parents. They watch and they feel within the environment something is going on. So often when that happens, you will find that your child may become very clingy. They want to hold on to you all the time. They need a safe base. They need to know that, you know what, and you'll notice that when your child falls or something happens, they run to you as the mommy. The wound may not even be that terrible, but just the fact that you are holding them and you are pieing them, so to speak. All you are doing, you're making the child feel it's okay, the fact that what you're going through. Now here, for the aunties and uncles and grandparents, maybe this is a good tip to keep in mind. Whenever there is loss, sometimes they want to come in and they feel like, I'm going to take the children with me to give the mommy or the daddy space. Be very much aware that there are maybe instances where, let's say, the parents or the loved ones, the caregivers are significantly impaired. Look, they can't even look after themselves. That would be appropriate to step in. But try as far as possible not to separate the child from their parents. They need to know that their parents are there. They can go to them. And as even if the option is available, maybe for someone to rather, let's say, sleep over and help around the house, that might be more useful than taking them away. But I think we got to read the situation and see if the parents aren't significantly impaired in their functioning, then it would be appropriate. But in other instances, try as far as possible not to try and separate the children from their caregivers. So that's one example, yeah.
They have already experienced the loss, and you take the child away, and then they're like, but where's mommy now?
Here we go.
You just told us somebody else was gone, now mommy's also not here. So it could have a longer lasting effect, I guess, than just what is happening at that time.
100%. That ties into, if I look at the next or some of the next sort of developmental stage, toddlers, for instance, grade ones, even the toddlers itself, you'll find that you'll find some of their behaviors regress. They go back in terms of the developmental milestones. Start wetting the bed possibly. Maybe potty training is at use. They mastered it, but now they're going back. Even baby talk. You will even find that they're no longer able to do the things they used to do before. And it's a way, the regression helps. There's even an instance that I've heard that grief and the trauma of the grief, it was a young woman. They were both in school. Her brother passed away. And she just went deaf, even though there's nothing wrong with her ears. It's as if she just couldn't hear anymore. And later, when the various experts and psychologists work with her, able to process the trauma, hearing came back. So we find that even in adults, that regression also happens. They could be, sometimes people go back to sucking their thumb again. It's a way of comforting, pacifying them. So the regression is also quite normal to see. Then I want to touch on this. It's very important that you will find that there's anxiety. Anxiety is a big part in children and when they experience grief. So they might be scared that somebody else is going to pass away. Am I going to die? Is mommy going to die? Is daddy going to die? And these are questions that they sit with. And when we mentioned earlier on about creating an environment where they feel safe to ask questions, that is crucial to manage that anxiety. In teenagers, you will find, some behavioral problems. Sometimes when people experience grief, especially boys, they tend to get angry a lot, maybe fights at school. Or you find that their academic performance for children goes down. They used to do very well in school. They're no longer doing well. And that's a clear sign that something is happening. Their concentration, their sleeping patterns, eating patterns is affected. Now, when you as a parent begin to pick this up, it's okay to go for help. And maybe we can speak a little bit about what parents can do later on to assist their children work through that grieving.
Heinrich, how can parents help? We're keeping an eye on our kids. We've seen that something's happening. What is the next step for us as the parents and caregivers and the guardians?
One of the biggest steps that we can take is actually to seek professional help. I think that's a number one thing. When you notice that your child's functioning is impaired, is no longer doing things the way he used to do, go and seek professional help. And also make sure when you select, let's say, a psychologist or a counselor, that they specialize in dealing with children, because there is a bit of a difference in how you work. Specifically, an example, some therapists, when they work with kids, they use play therapy, and it's a way of allowing children to express their grief through play. And also certain drawings that they do, and that's all linked to it. So be prepared to go for help. I think that's very important. And maybe also to add as parents, because we belong to a church and we believe that we have the Holy Spirit, sometimes we can also lean on that, God's help and the Holy Spirit, to guide us in terms of what to do with our children and how to respond. Another key factor is to be patient, because children move at different pace. You may find that one child was dealing with his grief, and that's when another child may not deal with it in the same way. We've got to be very patient and also have a lot of empathy for our children. We got to be able to put ourselves in their shoes. How traumatic it might be for that little child to realize someone is no longer there, someone has died. And so as parents, we want to be sensitive to their needs and we want to be very patient. Try not to criticize, because sometimes we say things like, just pull yourself together, just come right. Those are very unhelpful ways of trying to encourage your child. I think we want to be honest with them, we want to be patient with them, and we want to get them into a space where they get professional help. And may I add to that, it is also important for parents not to just only send the child. You as a parent must also go, because there might be certain things that you are doing that can either help the grieving process or actually interfere with it. So we got to enter that space with an open mind to also go and learn how to be and how to support your child.
So the key things here are to keep an eye on everyone around you.
Absolutely.
Generally what parents are doing, but just to see if there are any changes and if there's a way to intervene before it gets to a point where we can't intervene.
I just want to add one more thing. I think like what you mentioned, as parents, often we get very anxious when we see changes in our child's behavior. And that anxiety, sometimes we want to control the situation. We want to take charge of it. It's very important that we are boundaried in that we don't make our child anxious, like there's something greatly wrong with you. We want to let our child know, it sounds like you're going through a difficult time. Mom and dad is going to try and get you the help you need. And to rather be calm, because children learn from us how to be, how to respond. I've seen my little one, he was running, and then when he fell, he first looked at us to see how bad the fall was. And when we went, oh my goodness, then he would cry. But when we are okay, he's also okay. So children also take their cue from their parents, even teenagers. So we've got to be mindful to have that in place. Be very boundaried and specific in the way we deal with this.
Heinrich, when you're going through the grieving process, there's often very many people in your family space who are giving what they think is very helpful advice. They're trying to do very helpful things, but when you look back on it over a period of time, you realize a lot of those things actually didn't help at all. They actually did more damage than what they helped. Can you give us an example of some of these things that appear to be helpful but are not really, and things that we should avoid doing when we're going through this grieving process?
You know, it saddens me to talk about it, but we see in our communities more and more people are using very unhelpful ways of coping, and one of it is substance abuse. We find that when it comes to funerals and people are drinking excessively before, even during, even after the funeral. Now again, I want to mention that children look to the parents, they look to the people, the older people around them to see how they are managing and coping. And when we model the abuse of alcohol, it's very, very damaging to that child, because they grow up and it becomes the norm that whenever I'm feeling sad, whenever I'm not okay, I go to the alcohol. It saddens even amongst our young people, we've also seen that there's an increase in smoking dagga. We find that people are smoking sort of on their way to church. I've seen that personally. And so we want to manage that and make sure that we don't model for the young children that drinking alcohol and also abusing substances. These are all very unhelpful ways of doing it. Maybe it's a little bit more personal, I think, when we get into people's homes. We find that when people come and sympathize with us and as a loss of a loved one and they're there to support, often these people come at outrageous hours of the day, or they don't make the necessary contact to hear, listen, I want to come sympathize. It's always helpful to phone first, to check in. And if you do come, not to sit maybe the whole day, because that's difficult. Those people are grieving. They're going through a terrible time. Now they have to sit up and host you and carry tea and coffee, and you might come there empty-handed. They got to buy food or feed you. I think here we want to be mindful that if we want to go, it's a good practice to phone first. It's a good practice if you have a big family and there's lots of people. Take something with, take food with, take some coffee, tea with. It is just helping the family, and try, obviously, not to sit too long. Often when people go through grief, they just want to lay down. They want to be alone, and they don't necessarily have the energy to sit up and maybe host people. I'm saying this also, I don't want to discourage people from visiting each other, but be mindful of how it could impact other people. And then also, family often do this. There seems to be a lack of boundaries, because they know, look, it's my mother's house, it's my sister's house. They're in and out of your place, and they're going to your rooms where things are a little bit more personal. I think we also want to be aware of that. You are entering people's private space, even if you know them, even if it's family. Be respectful of that also, that we don't put them under pressure. I think one more thing, I think it's just a general statement. Sometimes people feel like I must say something. I must fix this thing. I can give advice. As far as possible, try and stay away from giving advice to people. What you want to communicate is that we love you, we support you, and if you want to talk, we're here to listen. That's okay. We are not all trained professionals to ask the right questions. And it doesn't mean that we can't, but it's more helpful rather let the professionals deal with that. What we want to communicate, what can we do for you? I am available to you. And when we realize that our role is simply to support and not fix, it helps with a lot of things.
And all of that, when we come back to the kids, it's again us showing them how to deal when they are in that situation, maybe when they are older, what's a healthy way to deal with grief and the after effects of it.
100%. Children learn more from what you do as opposed to what you say. And when we model that, our children will grow up being better adjusted, and when it comes to dealing with grief or any kind of very difficult emotional situation, they are more adjusted and better equipped to deal with it in an effective way.
And I think it's also important to, going through all of that trauma, how we also interact with our fellow adults also shows them in the future what is going to happen when somebody in my family goes and I have to deal with how adults are dealing with each other.
It's true. And I think you're touching a lot on some of the conflict we see in families when there's disagreements about arrangements and how things should be done. Here again, we want to model for our children that this is a time for the family to be united and not to be divided. And in all of this, we can also lose touch with our own needs and wants because we are constantly fighting off different opinions. We all after the same thing. We want to part with our loved one in a very special way. We all want to work through the grieving, and we want to model that for our children. And in all of this, I want to also encourage parents to take care of themselves and also to make special time for their children. There's an old analogy that we often use in the count. You'll notice when you fly in an airplane, the The staff will tell you when we're going through an emergency, put your mask on first. And the main reason for that is because if you are not strong enough, you can't help someone else. So make time to also take care of yourself so that you can be there for your loved ones and in particular your children.
So sometimes especially we saw with COVID, and sometimes when people have long-term illnesses and the death comes over a long period of time, there's sometimes unhelpful things that people also do to include their children in the process of this person passing away, and things that could possibly have deeper effects on a child later on in their lives.
Definitely. And one of those things is we find that with so many people having very smartphones, they tend to take pictures of people who are very ill and they may be on their way passing, or even whilst people are in the coffin, they are taking pictures and sharing that on their family groups. I want to strongly discourage that. It's very unhelpful, especially if children are exposed to it. I think if you think about any person, you never want to take a picture if you don't look your best. And when you think of someone who was ill, was busy dying, I mean, it's in a way you're taking their dignity away from them by taking a picture of them in that state and then to also share it. I would rather us focus on the way that person was and how they lived to preserve that memory, as opposed to a memory or a picture of someone who's busy dying or dead in the coffin. And here's the danger. You know, as children are very technologically advanced, so they play on mommy's phone, daddy's phone, they're playing a game, and now they come across a picture like that. And that is very traumatizing. And we don't want to expose our children to that kind of content. And you'll notice even, on the television, they will tell you that certain movies have an age restriction. There's a reason for it, because children are vulnerable and that kind of content can traumatize them. So there's a warning sign for that. Another thing to look out for is that often we share experiences or dreams about people who had passed on. Now, I got to remember, if you share that and there's a child in the company, it is very scary for a child. So we want to be mindful. In general, parents, adults, we must be careful what we say in front of children. Now, when we share content of dreams about a loss of a loved one, it's scary. They look at this, there's somebody that's dead that came to, it's a ghost, it's a monster that came. So we don't want to also expose our children to that. Let us always be mindful what we share in terms of the pictures as well as the dreams and some of the experiences related to the one that we lost.
What I found was helpful for our family was that we spent a lot of time with our children all together reminiscing about our loved one. And that I found was such a special way to, when we share stories and we make that sort of a group activity so that we can all have that connection and have those, instead of not necessarily pictures, but just having the stories and telling the stories and laughing together also.
Beautiful. I think that is a better way of doing it. Rather share the good stories, the memories, because that is what the child will hold on to and remember. And it's also what I like about your example is that it has created a space for us to talk about the one that has passed away. But we're doing it in such a positive way that we're remembering how they lived as opposed to how they died. And that I find is very crucial, especially when we talk to our children. Sometimes people go onto a tangent explaining, let's say it was a car accident, the scene. Let's not do that. It's a very bad practice to do. Rather focus on the good stories. When your child is a bit older and they're a bit more matured, we can share some of that content, but also be very aware that what might be traumatizing for you may not be for the other. So rather, I would say steer to the side of caution when you deal with that. Be very aware of what you share.
So you're going through dealing with death, you're watching your kids, lot of balls in the air here. So obviously, as a parent, as a guardian, As a caregiver, you have to make sure that you are also okay through all of these processes.
Yeah, sometimes we get so busy with the funeral arrangements and things. People often say that I was so busy that I didn't even get a chance to actually mourn myself, to grieve myself. And I think that's very important, to not forget yourself in this. It's crucial that you take care of yourself. And whether that is just taking a bath with bubbles in it for a half an hour, do that. Whether it's taking a mindful walk, do that. Whether it's just pampering yourself, whether it's just going to watch a movie, anything that may help you, just not forget you are also here and you need to take care of yourself. And I love that reminder that don't forget yourself through the pain, because there's still a life after the death. And you need to make sure that you're okay to live that, and also to support your kids in particular through that.
Thank you very much, Heinrich, for joining us and sharing your invaluable insight into this very interesting topic.
You're most welcome.
To the viewers, we would love to hear from you. Please engage with us on our social media platforms so that we can have a chat about today's episode and maybe even on future topics you would like us to address. From me, Maxine, and the team, goodbye.